Chapter 1. The Impossible Surgery. The operating theatre was silent, except for the slow, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor and the measured breath of filtered air moving through the vents above. White light poured down from the surgical lamps in a harsh, unwavering circle, bleaching all colour from the room until only shades of bone, steel, and shadow remained. Around the table stood a ring of physicians who had spent their lives studying the limits of the human body, and every one of them knew they were watching a man attempt something that should not be attempted. Dr. Stephen Woods did not look at them. His world had narrowed to the open cavity before him, to the fragile architecture of muscle and vessel that trembled beneath the touch of his instruments. Hours earlier, the patient had been declared beyond saving, too much damage, too little time, too many systems already failing. The consensus had been calm, clinical, final. But Stephen had requested the theatre anyway, and because of who he was, no one had refused. His hands moved with a steadiness that bordered on unnatural, each motion precise enough to seem pre-written, as though the procedure existed somewhere ahead of him, and he was only catching up to it. A clamp shifted, a suture tightened, a thin line of blood disappeared beneath careful pressure. The monitors wavered, dipped, then rose again in hesitant defiance of the prognosis recorded in the patient's chart. No one spoke. Even breath felt intrusive. One of the younger surgeons felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. He had studied under legends, had watched masters at work, but this was different. There was no hesitation in Stephen, no visible calculation, no sign of strain. Only focus absolute and complete, like a man standing in a place where doubt could not exist. It was the kind of certainty people used religious words to describe, though no one in the room would have admitted thinking it. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. Time inside the theatre obeyed a different gravity, pulled tight around the table where life and death argued in silence. A nurse adjusted the suction line with careful fingers. Another checked the patient's pupils, searching for signs that the mind had not already slipped away. The heart monitor continued its thin, stubborn rhythm, fragile as glass and twice as easy to lose. Stephen leaned closer, the light sharpening the angles of his face until he looked carved from the same pale brightness flooding the room. There was fatigue in him, there had to be, but it never reached his hands. He worked as though endurance were irrelevant, as though the body's limits applied to everyone except the person standing at the center of the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and utterly certain. "Clamp," he said. The instrument was placed into his palm before the final consonant faded. Another adjustment, another suture, one last movement so small it almost escaped notice. Then Stephen's hands became still, hovering for a fraction of a second above the place where the procedure had either succeeded or failed. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, suspended on the edge of a verdict no one could influence now. The heart monitor changed first. What had been weak and irregular steadied into a clearer rhythm, each beat arriving with growing confidence, like footsteps returning from a distance. A nurse looked up sharply. Another physician leaned closer to the screen, certain he had misread it. But the pattern continued stronger, cleaner, alive. No one spoke for several seconds, as if sound itself might break whatever fragile mercy had just occurred. Then the anesthesiologist let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and the tension in the room fractured all at once. Shoulders lowered, eyes widened. Someone whispered something that might have been a prayer, or might have been Stephen's name. The distinction felt unimportant in the moment. Stephen straightened slowly, the movement revealing the quiet weight he carried in his spine after hours without rest. He removed his gloves with practiced efficiency, turning them inside out, sealing the blood away as though closing a door. Only then did he allow himself a single glance at the monitor, confirming what everyone else already knew. The patient was going to live. Relief spread through the theatre in waves too controlled to become celebration, yet too powerful to hide completely. One of the senior physicians gave a small, disbelieving shake of his head. Another pressed fingers briefly to his eyes, collecting himself before anyone could notice. They had all read the numbers. They had all expected the same ending. And yet, here it was rewritten. Stephen stepped back from the table, creating space for the team that would carry the patient through recovery. His role in the story was finished. There would be reports, briefings, statements for people who needed explanations, but none of that belonged to this moment. This moment belonged to the quiet fact of survival. For a few seconds, no one moved toward the door. The room lingered in that fragile afterstate where the impossible had already happened, but reality had not quite caught up. Eyes turned towards Stephen, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, pulled by the same unspoken recognition. They were looking at the man who had done it. Applause did not belong in an operating theatre. Everyone in the room knew that. Hospitals were places of restraint, of professionalism, of emotions folded neatly out of sight. But something in the silence demanded release, and when one pair of hands came together soft, uncertain it broke the boundary the room had tried to maintain, others followed. The sound was quiet at first, almost embarrassed, as though it might stop itself. Instead it grew, filling the sterile brightness with something warm and human and impossible to regulate. Not loud, not chaotic, just sincere. The kind of acknowledgement that could not be written into policy. Stephen did not smile. He inclined his head once, a gesture of gratitude so small it might have been missed if anyone had blinked. Praise had never been the reason he stood at operating tables until exhaustion blurred the edges of the world. Praise changed nothing about the work waiting tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. But for a brief moment, standing beneath the white surgical lights with the sound of quiet applause around him, he allowed himself to feel the simple truth beneath all the noise and ceremony. He had kept someone alive, and in a life measured almost entirely by that single outcome, it was enough. Chapter 2. After the applause, the private dining room overlooked the city through a wall of glass that turned the skyline into a field of quiet lights. Evening had settled gently, softening the hard edges of buildings and traffic into something distant and almost peaceful. Inside, warm yellow lamps replaced the cold brightness of the operating theatre, and the air carried the scent of roasted herbs, wine, and polished wood instead of antiseptic and steel. Stephen sat among colleagues who spoke louder than usual, their voices loosened by relief and celebration. Laughter rose in uneven bursts around the table, the sound unfamiliar after the disciplined silence of the hospital. Someone had ordered a bottle far more expensive than necessary. Someone else kept refilling glasses, whether they were empty or not. The mood carried the fragile disbelief that follows survival, as though everyone present needed proof that the day had truly ended the way it had. A senior surgeon across from Stephen shook his head for what felt like the 10th time, still unable to accept the outcome he had witnessed hours earlier. He described the procedure in careful detail, tracing each impossible decision as if repetition might turn astonishment into understanding. Others leaned in, interrupting, adding their own memories of the moment when the monitor steadied and the room realized the patient would live. Each retelling made the event feel larger, more distant, already beginning to drift toward legend. Stephen listened without correcting anyone. He answered questions when asked, offered brief explanations when necessary, but he did not linger on the subject. The work itself had never felt miraculous to him. It was preparation, discipline, and the quiet refusal to stop when others stepped back. Yet watching the relief on their faces, he understood that the meaning of the day belonged to more than his own certainty. It belonged to everyone who had stood in that room and waited for an ending that never came. A younger resident raised a glass in a hesitant toast, his voice catching slightly before he found the words. "To Dr. Woods," he said, "for doing what the rest of us only hoped was possible." Glasses lifted around the table. Stephen inclined his head slightly, lifting his own glass a moment later than the others. "Thank you," he said quietly. The wine tasted rich and unfamiliar on his tongue, a reminder of how rarely he allowed himself to pause long enough to notice simple things. Around him, conversation shifted toward ordinary topics. Families, vacations postponed too many times. Small complaints about schedules and paperwork that felt almost comforting in their normalcy. For a little while, the weight of the hospital loosened its grip on everyone present. Someone asked Stephen what he planned to do next, now that the most difficult case of the year was behind him. "What's next for you, Stephen?" one of the surgeons asked. Stephen considered the question longer than expected. "I will be back at the hospital in the morning," he said. The table erupted in gentle protest. "Oh, come on. Not tomorrow. Take a day off for once." Even Stephen allowed a faint hint of amusement to touch his expression. It was the anesthesiologist who finally mentioned the ruins. "There's a site a few hours outside the city," she said. 17th century settlement. They just opened it to visitors. Apparently it was wiped out by some kind of epidemic. Several others nodded. "I heard about that. They found burial pits. Old medical tools too. To them, it was probably witchcraft or punishment from God," someone added. One of Stephen's closest colleagues leaned forward. "You should come with us this weekend," he said. "Short drive, fresh air, something other than fluorescent lights and alarms." Stephen looked through the glass wall toward the quiet city. The idea of stepping away from routine felt unfamiliar, yet beneath that instinct lived a quieter awareness of exhaustion. "All right," he said at last. "I will go." The decision pleased the table more than he expected. Plans formed quickly after that. "We'll meet outside the city. Saturday morning. Don't be late, Doctor." Dinner stretched comfortably into late evening. Plates emptied, glasses lowered. One by one, the intensity of the day softened into something manageable. When they finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and clean against Stephen's skin. The city continued around them without pause, unaware of the life that had nearly ended, unaware of the quiet celebration that had followed. Stephen returned home to the same silence that always greeted him, yet it felt slightly different now. Not warmer, but less absolute. Morning arrived clear and bright. Sunlight filled the streets as Stephen met the others at the edge of the city, where buildings gave way to open road. The drive carried them through quiet countryside touched by early autumn, fields fading slowly toward gold. Conversation moved easily between them, lighter than anything spoken within hospital walls. When they reached the site, the first impression was stillness. Low stone remnants rested beneath open sky, their shapes softened by centuries of weather. Paths had been marked for visitors, guiding careful steps between fragile structures and shallow depressions in the earth that once held homes, storage pits, and graves. The air carried the faint scent of soil and distant trees. A historian greeted the group and began explaining the settlement's final years. "Records show the illness spread quickly," the historian said. "They had no understanding of contagion. Treatments were desperate." Stephen listened with quiet attention, recognizing symptoms hidden beneath unfamiliar language. After some time, the group dispersed to explore at their own pace. Stephen walked beyond the main path, drawn by habit toward the edges of places rather than their center. The ground here was uneven, scattered with stones half buried beneath grass. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, casting soft shadows that shifted with the breeze. He was looking down when it happened. One careful step forward, then nothing beneath his foot at all. The earth gave way without warning, collapsing inward with a rush of dust and loose soil. Stephen felt the brief, impossible sensation of weightlessness before gravity claimed him. Light vanished above as the opening closed into darkness. The sound of the world disappeared into the hollow below. Then there was only the fall. Chapter 3. The world above the dark pane returned before sight. It moved through Stephen in slow, deliberate waves that told him his body was still working even while his thoughts struggled to gather. The air felt cold and damp against his skin, thick with the smell of soil and stone. He remained still at first, allowing instinct to guide him the way it always had when waking beside an unknown injury. Breath steady, limbs unmoving. Awareness building piece by piece instead of all at once. When he finally opened his eyes, the light above him looked wrong. It was dim and colorless, nothing like the clean brightness of a hospital ceiling. Rough stone pressed close on either side, uneven and packed with dirt that crumbled slightly when his shoulders shifted. Memory followed a moment later, the ground giving way, the sudden drop, the darkness that swallowed everything. He understood then that he had fallen farther than he first believed. He tested his arms and legs with slow precision, searching for the sharp signals of broken bone or internal bleeding, bruising along the ribs, a shallow cut near the shoulder, painful, but survivable. The quiet certainty of that assessment steadied him. Survival meant time, and time meant the chance to understand where he was. He drew a careful breath and pushed himself upright against the cold wall behind him. Sound reached him faintly from somewhere ahead. Voices, low and uneven, shaped by an accent he could not immediately place. Between them came the unmistakable rhythm of coughing that had settled deep in the chest. The pattern was familiar enough to stir the clinical part of his mind before anything else. Illness lived nearby, severe enough to carry through stone. A narrow slope revealed itself a few feet away, where the shaft widened into a rough passage leading upward. Weak daylight filtered down through the opening above. Stephen rose slowly, pausing until the dizziness passed, then began the climb. Each step required care, but the incline was manageable. Whoever had made this space had not intended it to trap the living below. When he emerged into open air, nothing matched what he expected to see. The marked paths of the archaeological site were gone. No railings, no modern tools. Instead, narrow dirt streets wound between timbered buildings darkened by smoke and age. Movement filled the space. People walked, spoke, carried bundles of wood and cloth. The world stood whole where ruins should have been. Several of them noticed him at once. Conversations faltered. Faces turned. Confusion shifted quickly toward caution as eyes moved across his unfamiliar clothing and posture. A child clung to an older woman's skirt. Someone whispered a prayer beneath their breath. Stephen remained still, trying to fit what he saw into reason and finding nothing that held. A man stepped forward, gripping a wooden handle as if it might serve as protection. Suspicion hardened his expression while he studied Stephen from head to foot. "Who are you?" the man asked. "My name is Stephen," he answered. "I fell." Murmurs spread through the small crowd. The language was close enough to understand, though shaped differently than he expected. Several people crossed themselves. The man did not lower the tool. From where? Stephen looked past him at the unfamiliar street, the smoke drifting into a quiet sky untouched by engines or distant sirens. No explanation available to him would sound sane. "I do not know," he said. The silence that followed felt heavier than the questions. Then another voice spoke from behind the gathered people, calm and steady. "Move aside. You are frightening him." They shifted reluctantly, revealing a young woman standing near the edge of the road. Her clothing was simple but clean, her posture composed, her gaze thoughtful rather than afraid. She studied Stephen with careful attention, as though measuring something the others could not see. "You are hurt," she said. "Yes." "You should not be standing." "I will manage." A brief flicker of disbelief crossed her face, followed by quiet consideration. "Come," she said, "before someone decides you do not belong here." Stephen hesitated only long enough to judge the risk, then stepped toward her. The crowd watched without speaking as she guided him down the narrow street. He felt their eyes on him until a turn in the road finally hid him from view. The house she led him to was small and built of timber packed with earth. A cloth hung across the doorway instead of a door. Inside, the air carried the scent of dried herbs and clean linen. Light entered through a narrow window and settled across a wooden table arranged with simple order. The space felt purposeful, shaped by quiet care. "Sit," she said. He lowered himself onto a bench, controlling the movement to keep the pain from spreading. She brought water in a clay cup and placed it in his hands. "What year is this?" he asked. She frowned slightly, puzzled by the question. "It is the year of our Lord 1612. The number settled heavily in his thoughts. Every explanation he knew failed at once, yet the world around him remained solid and unchanged. He forced himself to drink the water anyway. Staying alive still mattered, even without answers. She watched him in silence. "You truly do not know where you are," she said. "No," Stephen replied, "but I know I am far from home." She considered this, then gave a small nod as if accepting uncertainty without needing to solve it. "Then you will need help," she said quietly. Outside, somewhere beyond the thin wall, someone began coughing again. The sound was deep and strained, carrying the weight of serious illness. Stephen turned toward it without thinking. For the first time since opening his eyes in this unfamiliar place, instinct moved faster than confusion. "What is that cough?" Stephen asked. "A sickness," the woman answered. "It has taken many." Stephen slowly rose from the bench. "I should see them." She looked at him carefully. "You are injured." "I am also a doctor." The word meant nothing to her in the way he intended, but the certainty in his voice did. For the first time since falling into the darkness, Stephen Woods felt something steady return to him. Purpose. Chapter 4. The Shape of Sickness. The coughing did not stop. It came in hard bursts, followed by thin, desperate breaths that sounded like they scraped the inside of the chest. Stephen listened without moving, letting the pattern tell him what words could not. Wet congestion. Strain. A fever that had likely climbed too high for too long. The sound carried the familiar warning of a body running out of strength. The woman noticed where his attention had gone. She watched him the way someone watches a blade, unsure whether it will protect or cut. "He has been ill for 3 days," she said. "The heat will not leave him." Stephen set the cup down carefully. "May I see him?" Her gaze tightened. "You are not a priest." "No. Nor a physician of this town." "No. Then why would you know what to do?" Stephen met her eyes and kept his voice calm. "Because where I come from," he said, "this is my work." Silence settled. Somewhere beyond the wall, the coughing broke into a sharp gasp that ended with a weak groan. The sound held fear inside it, not only from the man who suffered, but from anyone who had been listening to him fade for 3 days. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing danger against the small chance of relief. When she opened them again, she had already chosen. "Come," she said. She led him into a smaller room lit by a single candle. The air was thick with heat and the sour, stale smell of sickness. A man lay on a low bed of blankets, skin flushed deep with fever, sweat soaking the cloth beneath his neck. His lips were dry and slightly cracked. Each breath rattled, and the muscles of his throat worked too hard just to pull air in. Stephen stepped closer, the familiar discipline of diagnosis taking hold. He did not have his instruments. He did not have medication. He did not have machines that could translate subtle failure into numbers. But he still had his eyes, his hands, and the knowledge carved into him through years of life and death decisions. "When did the coughing begin?" he asked. "Before the fever," the woman said. "It worsened 2 days ago." "Any blood?" "Not yet." Stephen leaned closer, watching the rise and fall of the man's chest. The breathing was rapid and shallow, with a wet rattle that suggested fluid and infection. The skin around the eyes looked slightly sunken. Dehydration. Exhaustion. The fever alone could kill him if it continued unchecked, even if the lungs held on. "We need clean water," Stephen said. "Boiled if you can. We also need cloth, as clean as you can make it." Her expression sharpened with doubt. "That will not cast out what has taken him." Stephen kept his tone steady. "I am not here to cast anything out," he said. "I am here to stop a body from failing." She stared at him as if trying to decide whether those words were arrogance or truth. Then the man on the bed coughed again, and it shook him so hard that his whole frame trembled. The sound answered her question more strongly than Stephen could. She moved quickly, gathering what she could from the room. A pot, a bundle of cloth, a small container of dried herbs she handled as if they were precious. Stephen watched her hands and saw care there, practiced and tired. Not superstition, survival. When she returned with water that had been warmed, Stephen soaked the cloth and pressed it gently to the man's forehead and neck. He kept the pressure light, the movement controlled. Cooling the surface would not cure infection, but it could buy time. Time was the first medicine available in any era. The man's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed with fever. His gaze drifted towards Stephen's face, then slipped away again as if he could not hold on to anything long enough to recognize it. "Easy," Stephen said quietly. "Breathe when you can." The woman watched closely, searching for signs that this stranger knew what he claimed. Stephen shifted the cloth and checked the man's pulse at the wrist. Fast and thready. Dangerous, but not gone. Not yet. He looked around the room, taking in the poor ventilation, the heavy blankets trapping heat, the proximity of stale air. "We need to keep him cooler," Stephen said. "We also need air moving through here. Open whatever you can." "There is a draft," she warned. "It can worsen the sickness." "A draft does not cause fever," Stephen said gently. "Heat like this can kill." She hesitated, then moved to the narrow window and opened it a small amount. A thin line of cooler air entered, carrying the scent of smoke and damp earth from outside. The candle flame flickered in response. Stephen turned back to the patient. His mind ran through possibilities, separating what was likely from what was only fear. Pneumonia, influenza, tuberculosis. Without tools, he could not name it with certainty, but he could still fight its effects. He could still keep the man hydrated, cooler and breathing until the body either won or lost. He adjusted the cloth again and watched for any change in the man's breathing. The rattle remained, but the next breath arrived with slightly less strain. Small improvements could be misleading. Still, they were something. The woman spoke quietly. "What is your true name?" she asked. "Not only Stephen, the name you would give if you wanted to be believed." Stephen did not look up from the man's face. "Stephen Woods," he said. She repeated it under her breath, testing the sound of it. "And what are you?" she asked, "if not a priest and not a town physician?" Stephen paused, then answered with the simplest truth. "I am a doctor." The woman held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the patient. Her expression did not soften into trust yet, but it shifted away from fear. That change was small, but it mattered. In a place like this, small changes decided who lived. Stephen kept working, eyes fixed on the fragile line between sickness and collapse. He did not know what this town would demand from him, and he did not know what the next hour would bring. He only knew the body in front of him was still breathing, and as long as that remained true, he would not stop.